Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Intro to Sociology. My name is Dr. Troy Lepper. Um, Most of the lectures are going to come out of the real world, an introduction to sociology. So let's get looking at the real world. So your first question is probably, what is sociology? If this is your first adventure into the discipline, it's a really good place to start. Um, Sociology, of course, is one of the social sciences. Um, and what the social sciences are disciplines that examine the human and social world. Um, when we think about sociology and sociologists and social analysts, we make a distinction between what we would call the everyday actor, or someone who approaches the world by using knowledge that is practical or taken for granted, kind of common sense stuff. You haven't thought of really much about why you think it. It's just there. You learned it somewhere in your past, and you've fashioned your behaviors based on it. A social analyst, on the other hand, is someone who approaches the world by using reasoning and questions to gain deeper insights. Um, uh, think of the iceberg that sits out there floating in the ocean. And if you look at it from the surface of the ocean, you might think that the iceberg is relatively small, but that's just because you don't see the enormity that is the iceberg under the water. And much like a social analyst, it's digging below, it's diving below the surface to find out a deeper insight on the phenomenon that you just saw a small bit of on the surface. As I mentioned earlier, the social sciences uh, share many characteristics. We share many characteristics with what we would call the hard sciences as well. Uh, Method in particular, which we'll get into in Chapter 2. As I mentioned, sociology is it's the linchpin in many respects of many of the other social sciences, or the social sciences: economics, psychology, geography, communications, anthropology, history, political science, all uh, tie themselves intimately with sociology as we try to understand patterns within organizations, within the structure of society. We rub against geography, we rub against political science and economics. And as you can see, these disciplines interact with the discipline of sociology um, in a very fluid fashion. The definition of sociology: Howard Becker directed us towards a definition of sociology as being the study of people doing things together, because neither the individual nor society exist independently of one another. Human beings are social beings. Without the contact of others, we can't really understand who we are. Um, Becker's research was very much focused on this this tug and pull between the individual and the structure of society. And he was looking at jazz musicians, and how a jazz musician who's never played with uh, any of the other jazz musicians sits in and almost effortlessly falls into the structure and form of the group. One of the things that you might ask yourself is, How does the structure of society shape you? Somebody might have told you that you act like someone in your family, whether that's your father or your mother or your uncle, or just a real close family friend. You might ask yourself, is that something that I inherited, or is that something that I learned? Was the structure of the relationship conditioning how I was acting as well? Sociologists are interested in all aspects of society. We look at groups of people and how they shape lives in pattern ways that distinguish their group from other groups. We're looking at patterns within society, but we're really not looking at society as a whole. That's too complex for us to really wrap our minds around. What we're really looking at is the patterns within society. Break it off a piece at a time and try to understand small aspects of society that would then in turn give you some insight on the larger society as well. Um, uh, Sociology is a focus on a broad range of institutions. Institutions are structures in our society. Education, that's an institution. Economics, politics, and there are other institutions as well. A few examples, other than the ones we've already listed, are religion and family, ones that you might be very familiar with. Institutions are like the building blocks of the physical building blocks of a society. When you look out into your community, you see a structure out there that we then in turn lay the social infrastructure upon. We have roads, we have buildings, we have green space. Well, institutions serve as the framework for what we know as social life, how we learn what we know, how we structure ourselves, where we get the moral basis of our beings. Those come from the institutions, and sociology is really concerned with how those institutions work. Um, when we think about the sociological perspective, um, so as I mentioned earlier, sociology is about digging deeper into something. And you have to ask yourself, well, how do I dig deeper? How do I know where I am in reference to the type of thinker that I am? And so the sociology or the sociological perspective is a way of looking at the world through a sociological lens. This perspective is developed when we understand where we started in reference to the beginner's mind, and then how we roll through an experience of culture shock, which ultimately leads to the sociological imagination.